cannot be. Yeah. So let me briefly introduce Dennis first, and he's an Jung analyst from the United States, and I think he's trained in Zurich. And today he's going to talk about um, on the synchronicity, dreams, and the I Ching. So hexagrams in association with dreams and getting meaningful answers from the I Ching, while synchronicity are within Hermes domain. He being the god of alchemy, Jung's main symbol system, possible synchronicity experiments with the I Ching, and dogs that know when their owners are coming home, suggest experiments to statistically prove synchronicity. Synchronicity is inimitable to the indigenous world. Whilst Jung and Pauli said it was necessary for a holistic worldview in the West. So let's welcome Dennis to give his presentation first, and then we will have some time for discussion.
Okay, well, thank you for inviting me to present. And let me do the most anxious thing of all is to try to get my, there it is. No, it worked before. Oh, darn it. So stop share, try it again. I don't see my screen on here. Huh.
You were there for a minute.
Did you see it there for a minute?
No.
Oh, wait a minute. Is there something behind there? Oh, dear lieber. All right, I'm going to try this.
Yeah. There.
So, do you see it now?
Yeah.
Oh, thank God. Okay, that's the worst part. Getting the technology going. Okay, I'm going to be talking about synchronicity, dreams, and the I Ching. And first of all, how I got interested in this topic. I got out to Berkeley in the fall of 1967 to work on a PhD in insect pathology, microbial control of insect pests, so you don't have to use chemical pesticides. And Jung was in the air, so even though I was in the entomology department, I still kept hearing about Jung. Thought, who in the heck is this guy? And one of my heroes, singers from the 60s, was Bob Dylan. And this is a picture from an outtake from his Bringing It All Back Home 1965 album. Outtakes are photos that they didn't use. And notice at Dylan's feet is the Wilhelm copy of the I Ching. And Dylan said in an interview in 1965, the I Ching is the only thing that is amazingly true, period. Besides being a great book to believe in, it's also very fantastic poetry. And Jung was so much in the air that the first Unitarian Society in Berkeley in 1975, to commemorate the 100th anniversary of Jung's birth, had a week-long series of events about Jung, and the last event was a I Ching workshop. So I did the workshop, learned how to use the arrow stalk method, and that is the only method that I have used to consult the I Ching. So I started reading Jung in 1973. That was 6 years after I got to Berkeley. And I was so taken by Jung. It seemed like a way to bring science, psychology, spirituality together, that within 9 months after I started reading, I applied to train at the Jung Institute in Zurich. Had a dream I got accepted, and indeed got accepted. I never thought of being a therapist, but like I said, this was such an amazing, comprehensive worldview. So I thought that it was the sequel to Thoreau's Walden that I had read in the 7th grade. Never really found a a sequel to that book, but Jung really did that for me, especially in connection with nature, is what I ended up writing a lot about. And it's been my experience with the I Ching that it works. It's not a belief. I've been using this book since 1975, personally in my practice. And like Dylan said, it is amazingly true. So there's a difference between belief and experience. Jung talked about that in the face-to-face interview that BBC broadcast in 1959. He was asked if he believed in God, and he said, I don't believe, I know. And later on, he said, I have to have a reason to think something is true or not. And that's my position on the Jing. I don't believe that it works. It's been my years of experience that it does work. So moving into the area of dreams and the I Ching, I'll mention a couple of my dreams first. I had a dream in Zurich that I was walking in nature, and I saw hexagrams disappear into the various elements that I was working on, looking at. But a bigger dream than that, to set it up, the big exam at the Zurich Institute, I finished my training in 1983, is the fairy tale exam. So you're locked in a room for 6 hours with all the symbol dictionaries you want to use. And after that, you have to have a typed interpretation graded by 3 fairy tale examiners. So it's not like a lot of Jung institutes do. You have to turn in a paper on archetypal material. No, you have to have this symbolic and archetypal attitude. And you cultivate that by being in fairy tale groups. I took Marion Woodman's place in her fairy tale group. Another person that you may have heard about in the Jungian world, Jim Hollis, and I trained together. Jim Hollis calls our training Old Zurich. And that is this emphasis on symbols and archetypes and dreams. So the night before the big fairy tale exam, I had a dream. At the end of the dream, I was shown a hexagram. But then, so I wouldn't forget it, I was shown it again. So that hexagram on the left, in the second appearance of the dream, if you look at those lower 4 lines, that was just one solid block. Where that broken line is there near the top, that was a clear space. And then there was that yang line at the top. So it was pretty easy to remember the hexagram. So I looked it up before I went over for the exam. And it's hexagram 14, possession in great measure. So I took that blank spot in that second place from the top to be a changing yin line. I'll get a little more in detail on that later on for those that aren't familiar with the I Ching. So you change that changing yin into a yang, and you get the hexagram on the right, which is the creative, which is, I think of as a generative energy of the universe. We experience it most directly, and everybody does, in our dream world. Every night, the incredible creativity individually experienced through our dreams. Needless to say, I did very well on the fairy tale exam. So the way that I use the Jing with my analysans, I feel that it's an incredibly powerful addition to psychoanalytic work. If you're working with somebody in therapy intensely for some period of time, working with their dreams, and if they get to a point where I think, if I were at this point and kind of stuck, I'd consult the Jing. That's when I suggested. So Jungians are able to bring in this other dimension. Where are those meaningful answers coming from? Something outside of space-time. I'll touch upon that briefly. So the one reason I got so quickly inculcated with Jungian ideas, I was taking time off from writing my PhD thesis in insect pathology, and was reading Jung during the week and I get stoned on the weekends, go to parties, corner people talk about Jung. Come home, my girlfriend, later wife, would go to bed, put on my earphones, listen to my favorite Pink Floyd Uma Guma album, and analyze my dreams. So I quickly integrated Jung. When I got accepted, in Zurich, they suggested I would start analysis. I hadn't done any therapy before I came to Zurich. So I thought this will go quick. Have my analysis on the weekend, get stoned, analyze my dreams. And then before my fourth session of analysis, I had a dream that a doctor, my age, and a nurse were on the top floor of a high-rise hospital building, and they just delivered a baby. And the doctor, then the baby's born dead. And the doctor tells the nurse he thinks the reason the baby was born dead is because he was stoned during the delivery. Well, that's a pretty clear message. High rise, getting high, birth, something new, potential, just starting analysis, my first step before going to Zurich. The baby's born dead because of marijuana. So I thought, God, I really enjoyed marijuana so much, had spiritual experiences even on occasion. So I asked the Jing about it, and I got this hexagram, one of the most negative in the book for a book of changes because it's standstill, stagnation. Those upper three lines are yang lines, are related to heaven. Natural movement is up. The lower three lines are related to earth. Natural movement is down. Heaven and earth are out of relationship with each other. Standstill, stagnation. So it was clear, and to me, that's one of the many examples I've seen in my years of working with the Jing and dreams, myself and with analysans, of the obvious correlation between the metaphoric statement in the dream and the I Ching. So as a consequence, I think I made a good decision not to just go cold turkey and never smoke again. I say, I'll give myself 4 months, give my psyche a chance to adjust and see where I am then. So that's how I was able to stop smoking marijuana. I like to give this talk whenever I can or mention that because marijuana is legalized in many more states. And the issue about the effect of marijuana, especially on young people and their emotional development and how it could crimp their development, I think is important. So that's why I like to use this example. The most powerful example, and I hope you all had a chance to watch that talk. It was suggested viewing, the Orange County presentation I gave on I Ching and dreams. It was called Unique Messages from the Self, Hexagrams from the I Ching appearing in the dreams of a modern man. So I'll just do a teaser dream for you in case you haven't watched the video. It's a very complicated series of dreams to present. So I just want to, like I said, give you a sense of it here. This was an analysan in his third round of analysis with me for 1.5 years. He wanted to work on his anima issues, and it was at a difficult point in his life, issues around his relationship with the feminine, if you will, and at a crucial point in our work, some crucial points in our work, 6 times he was told in the dream to consult the I Ching, or he was given a hexagram in the dream, and then when he awoke, he intuited the changing lines. And then once, the last time this happened with the I Ching, his anima figure that had followed him throughout this 1.5 year work tossed the coins to generate a hexagram. And he remembered that hexagram, and it was so in line and a summation comment on our work that showed that the feminine had been integrated into his masculine, very young psyche. So this is an early dream that he had. Like I said, I'm just mentioning it. In that Orange County talk, I go into the many interesting associations to all of these elements. You'll notice this archetypal dimension, it occurred quite early in the work for this third round. The dream. I'm on the western part of State Avenue in the city that he lives in, and come to a doorway where Jesus is sitting on an old milk crate. In his hands, he holds a spear, which is at once a rubber ball and the Tao. He's been getting into Taoism at that time. There's a woman nearby who, like Jesus, is dressed in scruffy clothes. I think she may be Mary Magdalene. As I look at the ball, I'm aware of each of the lines of the well hexagram is associated with one of the women I have known, in ascending order from my first sexual encounter to the top line. The hexagram as a whole is associated with my wife. I am to meditate on each of the lines to discover which of them are changing. As I'm thinking of this, Jesus and Mary Magdalene walk toward the southwest. We arrive at the cactus, which has been transplanted from the southeast. Jesus, whose walk feels a bit mechanical, not quite fluid, think of that in relationship to his Christianity, holds the ball up to the cactus, demonstrating that the ball, the cactus, and the stone are the same shape. When he brings it away, there is blood dried on it, which I know is left when I press my face to the cactus. That was an important image at the starting point for our first round of analysis. He's now in his third. We return to the chamber in the west where the stone is on the table. Mary Magdalene takes the instrument and delicately engraves the hexagram of the well on the outside of the stone. Eventually, there will be 4 hexagrams engraved on the outside. The rest of the analysis was as those hexagrams appeared one at a time at various points in his analytic journey and were engraved on the stone. And this is a diagram, a simple one that I made to summarize where this was. Notice that the directions are associated with Jung's typological functions. And there's the scorpion in the cactus being moved from the southeast to the southwest. And notice also the significance of natural figures, lightning and mountain, which signified very importantly in his dreams. So I won't go, like I said, in that Orange County talk, I go into a great deal about that. This is just to refresh your memory if you saw it and to encourage you to watch it. So he had been on sabbatical during that time. So he had the time and he devoted a good part of his conscious energy when he wasn't busy with some other things to his analytic process. He, when he would go to bed, he would think about where he was on the journey and ask for a dream to further him on a journey. So that's how focused he was. I never worked with an Alisan that had dreams that appeared in such a sequential order around the developing theme of the analytic process. So I don't know of anything else like this in the Jungian literature, and I have encouraged him to publish. So I want to move in a little different direction now to thinking about shamanism and the I Ching. So to set this up, the most unique experience that I had was in my last year of training in Zurich. I was sitting at Bahnhof Enge train station in Zurich, waiting for the train to go home. I was looking over somebody's hexagrams, and I just had this overwhelming sense that there was a connection between the I Ching, the genetic code, and the theory of evolution. And all these ideas kept pouring out of my head for 10 days. Then I spent several months reading, developing the ideas about that. And whoops, I was going to show you, this is what hexagram 48 looks like, the judgment material from Wilhelm and so on. See the upper and lower trigram. It's wood underwater. It's about a bucket being lowered into the well to retrieve the water. And this eventually resulted in my Zurich thesis, Synchronicity experiments with the I Ching and their relevance to the theory of evolution. So during that 10-day period when all these ideas were coming out, I developed a synchronicity experiment. And when it would be very difficult to do, but not impossible. I believe that you could put statistics to this type of experiment. And when I realized that this could possibly work, I just felt like the ground was falling out from under me. I was walking across my living room. We had a wonderful view of the Alps. And then I realized that causality is very comforting. And that's one of the reasons science is so powerful. So a simpler version of this experiment, I haven't conducted it, but you're working with a person in analysis, some intense work. This is a person that's having an affair. So at one point, you would have them, with you out of the room, or when they're home before they come in for a session, ask two questions. One question, wisdom to guide me about, let's say it's a woman. This is a case I actually worked with. Wisdom to guide me about my husband, my relationship with my husband. A second question, wisdom to guide me about my relationship with this boyfriend. And then she would give those answers to the analyst, and the analyst was to figure out which hexagrams went with which male in that woman's life. And I think that this could be possible to do. Now, just to move it into the direction of evolutionary theory, the I Ching is based on a binary code, the Fu-Si arrangement. And there are 64 hexagrams. And what do you know? There are 64 code words for all the amino acids that are joined together to make proteins. And proteins are really the foundational elements that build life and make each species unique. Each species has its own protein sets, if you will. I'm not saying that the Jing and the genetic code are the same. I'm saying that they both have a binary base, that they illustrate that the archetype of number, which Jung said was the ultimate ordering force in the universe for the human psyche and for natural phenomena, that the code of life and the code for the physical continuum, if you will, is binary. So there is the Fu-Si arrangement in the Jing. And just a quick review for those of you that are not familiar with the Jing and how you consult it. Easiest way is to take coins, like take 3 pennies, give heads a value of 3 up there on the upper left, tails a value of 2, shake them up, toss them out, count out the answers. So if you had heads, tails, that would be 3, 3, 2, that would be an 8. You can only get 4 numbers, 6, 7, 8, and 9. They correspond to respectively old yin, young yang, young yin, old yang. You do that 6 times, start from the bottom, and then the numbers you get to translate into the lines, and that's your hexagram. The old yins, old yangs are changing lines, change them to the opposite. leave the others the same. That's how you get your hexagram for the future. So hexagram 32 is where you are now. 47 is where you are in the future. Just like I say, as a refresher. So a dream that I had then that made me suspicious that there could be relationships between chromosomes and synchronicity. I had a dream that I was standing in a hospital hospital hallway, hallway, a lot of doors going into the individual rooms in the hospital. And a nurse comes out from a door on the left and tells me it's a girl and her name is Rebecca. Well, we hadn't thought about getting pregnant about that time, but a couple of weeks later, we found out that my wife was pregnant. So when indeed a girl was born, we decided, well, we have to name her Rebecca. So two things about that. I met a couple of people in my life that said they knew what sex their girlfriends, the child of their girlfriends would be. So that's one thing to know kind of at whether it's male or female. But if you look at the Rebecca dream, wait a minute, you're talking about personality traits connected with the genetic code, something that specific. So with that in mind, I've never been accused of not having an imagination. So there are a couple of different thought experiments that I created to help biologists begin to imagine how synchronicity could work with evolutionary theory. And here's the simpler one I came up with. Frogs are fertilized externally. Female extrudes the eggs, and the male is on her back and squirting sperm onto the eggs as they're extruded. So when you're ready to consult the Jing, you take 16 unfertilized eggs, one at a time, dip them into frog sperm, and then determine whether it's going to be a male or female based on whether it has the male or the female chromosome. So yeah, a male is associated usually with yang, odd numbers, so you give that a 3, like a heads. And if it were a female chromosome, be a female frog, you would give it a 2. So that's as far as I want to go with that. That's a whole talk about synchronicity and the theory of evolution. It happened to be a topic that Wolfgang Pauli was interested in, and one of the things he and Jung would talk about on their Sunday morning chit-chats. Now that my experiment would be very difficult to do with the like the woman having an affair example. I think the best example is in this book by Rupert Sheldrake, one section where they're talking about this woman's dog, Janty, that seemed to know when she was coming home. A lot of pet owners think that's happening with their dog. But the experiment that he did, the statistics and so on, to me are very convincing. It was critiqued by one of the debunkers of New Age type stuff. And I think that his critique it does not debunk it. But here's the experiment. He done several, but the particular one was the dog would always go to sit in this window box before the owner would come home, but he would go there other times of the day. So whenever the dog goes to the window box, you have a timed recording, and you record that when it goes there and how long it's there. And the experiment was that they had some random number generator tell the owner when to take public transportation, a taxi or whatever, to go home. And it was statistically significant that the dog would go to the window and while she was on her way home, or when she had decided that she was going to start on the way home. There was a statistical difference between the amount of time it spent there and when it would just go there occasionally. So to me, that's the most convincing evidence. But like I said, I don't need statistical proof for that. It's been my experience that it works. It proves that there's something in the psyche that is outside of space-time in this other dimension. So Wolfgang Pauli and Jung said that synchronicity had to be added to indestructible energy, space-time continuum, and causality to have a complete picture of a reality. So synchronicity is just so, like space-time and so on, calculus, causality, what Robert Satko talked about last time, is just as real as the Fibonacci series and so on, and complexity theory. These things exist out there. We discover them. We don't invent them. Jung pointed out that numbers were the purest form of the archetypes. And just an aside, that talk I gave on the I Ching, I tried to illustrate how the Chinese sages started off with numbers, used yin and yang lines as the first way to begin to put some storyline or some metaphors to those very abstract things called numbers. So with synchronicity then, especially brought into analysis, it's like the universe is seeing you. So if you're a Christian and say, well, God sees me, I have no trouble with that idea. Or it's not the creepy way that Sting's saying about, I'll be watching you. But it's like you are seeing that something that's a lot bigger from yourself. That's an incredible container to be able to bring into your analytic process. So I want to move then from that into shamanism. And because this relates to a talk I wanted to give at that last international conference in Zurich in August. It was on the undescribable. And I immediately came up with a talk I wanted to give with synchronicity and the connection to shamanism. So my experiment with the I Ching then, I had C.A. Well, here's the main book I like to use, Richard Wilhelm's I Ching. And there is C.A. Meyer. He read my thesis and he said my experiment couldn't work because he was, I thought, hung up in the definition of synchronicity that it just happens. But when you think of what you're doing when you consult the I Ching, you're expecting a synchronicity, right? You have to be in the right state of mind. You have to hope that it will happen. It has to be an important question. And all these ways of choosing an important question, how to frame the question, and so on. That's in an article that I had that was published with the proceedings of the first international conference on Jungian psychology and Chinese culture, use of the I Ching in the analytic setting. I went into all of that stuff. So if you have the proper question, 8 words or less, an important issue, you're expecting an answer, and you get, like I said, meaningful answers. You have to be in that don't know space. So then I'll move, there's that, it was published in English in Quadrant in the summer of 2001. And I've had a lot of experience with Native American ceremonies. And Vine Deloria Jr., who is a very well known and respected philosopher, Native American, wrote a book called C.G. Jung and the Sioux Traditions, Dreams, Vision, Nature, and the Primitive. And he very legitimately criticized Jung for the racist things he said, but saw that beneath Jung's persona that appears in the collected works and his writing, there was really an indigenous soul. That's what he clued in on. And he said that Jungian psychology is the best Western framework for approaching an indigenous mindset. So one of the things that I emphasize in my presentations, I don't know how many Jungians do it, but I think his idea of the layers of the collective unconscious are so important. So the very top of those peaks is the ego. You go down through the various layers. national layers, cultural layers. Second from the bottom, before you get to the diagonal lines, the indigenous cultures, that all cultures have an indigenous layer, and that is very closely related to dark brown layer G, the animal ancestors. All these layers are in continuous interaction with each other. And that borderline between the indigenous ancestors and the animals is very thin when you think of spirit animals and medicine animals and bush spirits and so on. So Thomas Singer is a Jungian analyst that has made a great deal about the cultural unconscious. To me, that is just one of the layers in these collective unconscious. So a quote from Jung then to set us up. Man has always lived with a myth. And we think we are able to be born today and to live in no myth without history. That's a disease. That's absolutely abnormal, because man is not born every day. He is born once in a specific historical setting with specific historical qualities. And therefore, he is only complete when he is in relation to these things. To wipe out the common connection with the past is a mutilation of the human being. So Jung was very much into this, and his near-death experience that he writes about in Memories, Dreams, Reflections. One of the things he was most looking forward to were to be talking to people who knew just where his place was in history. Now, this is a bit of a side. Most of my lectures now about Jung and the environment. I'm very concerned about young people, so taking this idea of where you're born in a particular place in history. We are at a unique moment of the history of our species on the planet, in that we have so messed it up. So while the young person looking at their place in history, they are in what is being called the Anthropocene era, an era of planetary history dominated or influenced the whole planet by humans. And just a quote from an incredible article I read recently pointed out that there is no non-catastrophic future. Several tipping points in the environment are being approached. Quote, totally halting fossil fuel use would entail the destruction or stranding of about $13 trillion in capital assets that would collapse world economies. As things now stand, the crisis will not wait for anything less than a blitz to strip elites of the assets they hold and defend. There is no path to a livable planet that does not pass through complete destruction of business as usual. And when I mention this in my talks, I try to bump people out to point to the dimensions of the change we need. And then I go to Jung's idea of the necessary paradigm shift in the world that in 1940 he called the New Age and Age of Aquarius. That's a bit of an aside, but just to give you a sense of being born at a particular point in history, a particular moment in time. Now, Jung's farthest look into the future, at the end of Memories, Dreams, Reflections, he saw Aquarius, the water bearer, pouring water into the mouth of the southern fish, the collective unconscious. Think about, again, those layers of the collective unconscious. And it's at that animal ancestor level, ourselves as animals needing food, clothing, shelter, relatively stable environment, that's what we're messing up. And that's why I think Jung's psychological system, especially as related to indigenous people, is the framework for young people in our species going forward. So I got two of my spirit animals from my dreams, but the most particular powerful environmental connection was a single image dream I had near the end of my training in Zurich, a typical Wisconsin meadow scene, but every atom in that image was alive. It was a sacred and numinous dream. It's the most beautiful dream I've ever seen. I equate that to hexagram 1 in the I Ching, inspiration. Hexagram 2 is to be inspired by hexagram 1 and manifested in space and time. So we just don't go around boasting, oh, I had this beautiful dream. It's like, no, I took it as that's what my soul would look like if it were environment. So when I go to my favorite place, and I have a series of a couple of talks I delivered on that. Here in Milwaukee, I haven't gotten that up on my YouTube channel, but I took Hillman's idea of Aphrodite as a soul of the world. So when I go there, I say, this is what my soul would look like if it were a natural landscape. So I look at everything like a lover to the beloved as a way of cultivating soul and place and connection to the land. So let's see, where am I? It's so important. And the result of all that was in my volume 4 of the Dairy Farmer's Guide to the Universe, Land, Weather, Seasons, Insects, and Archetypal View. That was my hexagram 2 manifestation of the sacred meadow dream. I think it's so important to realize that Jung was fascinated by Merlin. That was probably his main self-image. And Jung said we haven't evolved past the latter part of the Middle Ages. That's when the Merlin, the Grail legend was popular. Jung said Merlin was the hero of the Grail legend. And who was Merlin? It was the devil's opposite, or in Jungian terms, complement of the divine impregnation of the Virgin Mary. So the devil impregnated a virgin. Merlin was the offspring, but because he was tutored by a monk, he didn't get into the dark side of that side. So Jung said that one of the myths was that Merlin got so fed up with the Christians he was trying to help, he disappeared into the woods, and only occasionally you could hear the cry of Merlin. Well, Jung half-jokingly said, when Merlin disappears, he goes to Bollingen. So he had this very powerful identity. And I link it with Jung saying the challenge for modern men and women was to unite their cultured side, which includes science, with the 2 million-year-old man within. And I see Merlin as that bridge. And that Christianity in the New Age had to come to terms with the paganism and so on they'd been persecuting through the centuries. And also, von Franz in Man of the Symbols, chapter 3, talked about the exceptional, pure, unformed sense of the self that is found in isolated bands of Labrador Indians and the Scape natives. They have no collective religious beliefs or ceremonies. They rely on their inner companion, my friend, Mr. Pio, the great man within. You don't like to talk about that. So by paying attention to their dreams, they get guidance from Mr. Pio for their lives, helps them foretell the weather, and it guides them in hunting. And remember that Jung formed this deep connection with Mountain Lake when he went to visit the Taos Indians in, I think, 1924. They exchanged correspondences for the rest of Mountain Lake's life. And Jung used Mountain Lake and he called Egyptian priests as examples of enlightened human beings, if you will. A book that was on our reading list in Zurich, Jung was really intrigued by Black Elk, a Teton Sioux Indian. At 9 years old, he was unconscious, I think, for 12 days, in which he was given kind of the entire pantheon of the Sioux spiritual world. And then he embodied that through many years of his life by creating rituals to put ritual form to some of the images. And Jung said that's how rituals come into the world, not by committee coming up at one, but by visions of individual human beings. So my model for the world is one of Black Elk's vision of a flowering tree at the center of the world surrounded by the hoops of all the nations and races and the animal nations, the flower nations, et cetera, et cetera. That's my image for the integration of human psyche and cultures with the environment. Coming back to our culture, Carl Sagan, co-chair of Religion and Science for the Environment, 1992, put out a petition that included this statements: efforts to safeguard and cherish the environment need to be infused with a vision of the sacred, I think in my meadow dream, while at the same time a much wider and deeper understanding of science and technology is needed. So I use my meadow dream as an example of how you can use big dreams to connect to the environment. So I take up Deloria's challenge to kind of wrap your head around what he presented in his penultimate book, The World We Used to Live in, Remembering the Powers of the Medicine Man. It was a collection of these amazing things that shamans could do, like using special stones to help them find a lost cow or a lost rifle or something. So my idea is, this is the talk I wanted to give in Zurich. Well, maybe I better say a little more about shamans first. Yes. In Zurich, one of the things we were told in the primitive work, primitive course, that's very politically incorrect nowadays, but Christianity is not my way, but thy way be done. In shamanism, it's not thy way, but my way be done. So the shamans, with their visions, have the vehicles for getting into that other realm beyond space and time that synchronicity illustrates is there. Their death song, their altar, and so on. But they're also able to come back out, and that is so important. They go into that realm looking for answers to problems in their life or for their culture. So it's a deliberate entry into that realm, looking for answers in that archetypal domain. It's not to get high and experience something spiritual, but to bring something back into space-time, if you will. And they can talk to animals and plants and so on. How do they know which plants are going to be the healing medicine for the disease they're working in? Does this suggest that there's some sense at this molecular level about what sort antibiotics or so on would be? I think this is should be open to some serious consideration. And just think of how one spirit guide can help you and assist you in going into that world. So my Native American experiences then, I've had 39 years now of sweat lodge experiences. I've been out to 21 sun dances, and this is mostly because of a dear friend of mine, Fred Gustafson, who was a Jungian analyst, a sun dancer, and a Lutheran minister. And it's my going out to the Rosebud Reservation, South Dakota, to support him that I got so deeply immersed and saw many incredible things happening. And one of the most powerful experiences for me is after my dad's sudden and tragic death. 2 weeks after that, I was able to be taken into the sacred circle to the Sundance tree, and I just wept and wept to be contained in nature, in living ritual that went on for 4 days. That enabled me to get into the full depths of my grief. So one thing I say, modern men and women are a tremendous disadvantage to try to get through life without the benefit of ritual. So just a couple of, I did a 2-day vision quest. And at the end of the second day, I had all these incredible abstract images in my mind. A lot of synchronistic things happened during that. But the most interesting, two of the most interesting things, at one time when I was doing a prayer round, I had this sudden and very powerful sense that my left leg was the leg of what I know to be one of my spirit animals. So just that physiological embodied sense. The other was at the end, I would sit most of the time facing the west, and the flag for the west is a black flag, and there's often wind blowing and so on. But this one moment when I was thinking something like this synchronicity stuff and so on, what is all this about? And that black flag blew right into my face, and it stayed there, and I'm thinking, something's happening here. And it stayed there a little while longer. Just those kind of things, when you're in those archetypal places, happen. And that's when synchronistic things happen, when you said you're in those archetypal domains. So to me, it's just a peek into what that indigenous world would be like. There are many ways of getting into that realm beyond space and time. And I'll be moving toward a conclusion here before too long. Vision quests, sweat lodges, deep meditation. My analyst told me one time she was meditating deeply, and the arms fell off of her clock. Near-death experiences, mediums and psychic, big dreams, psychedelic shamans, archetypal periods like birth and death, my Rebecca dream, for example, living religions and rituals, moments in Jungian analysis when the spirit enters, etc. Also, indigenous artifacts on the land in Wisconsin. We have these Indian mounds. Took a great deal of effort with baskets and so on to move great amounts of earth, shape them in the forms of animals, birds, and so on. And the type of animal, the arrangement of the animals on the topography, where they're pointing to solstices, equinoxes, and so on, and performing rituals at those sites and so on, all are means of getting you to that other domain. All these domains in the West, there's a sweat lodge, and all these domains in our Western image are related to Hermes. I think my most important volume is 3 Hermes, Eco-Psychology and Complexity Theory. So each of the gods and goddesses had a worldview, a complete worldview from their perspective. So the god Ares or Mars, god of war, to him, the saying is, if all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. Aphrodite, looking at the world from her perspective, in terms of love, sensuality, sexuality. Apollo, god of science. Hermes is the trickiest god. He's the god of liminal spaces. And he was the only god that could go into the underworld and come back, like going down there to bring Persephone back into this world. And one of the biggest liminal spaces, and the way I connect it with when I lecture in China, is the Taoism, and in this Taoist robe. So the Tao points to the source of the 10,000 things. So what I see there, like kind of like waves, and kind of a phallic-like thing coming up from that, I see those waves as being like the source of the 10,000 things. And then you look up, there's this kind of dragon with a yin-yang symbol, and I think that's Hermes, because Hermes would be at that liminal space between non-existence and existence and something coming into existence. So that dragon and holding up the yin-yang symbol would be Hermes, and just below it, it looks like, is that a swan? Is that water? It's that very liminal space. And the yin-yang symbol, a symbol is something that has known elements and unknown elements. So the known elements kind of point to something that's unknown. It kind of begins to give you a sense of the quality of the unknown. And then in the Chinese system, then, if the supreme ultimate at the top, you can think of that as the enigma within an enigma, what Lao Tzu talked about at the source of the 10,000 things. First, a symbol, elements of both, but then consciousness is the distinction between one thing and another. That's when the symbol breaks down into yin and yang, and then you keep doubling and doubling, bifurcations like in complexity theory, and you end up eventually with the 64 hexagrams. Now, Hermes' secret then is his wand. And the secret is what you don't see. That's why I chose this image of Hermes, because it emphasized the space between those two upper right arms. You can think of those two arms as all opposites or complements. And Hermes is what happens on the interactions between them. So it's like male and female, sperm and egg, energy form, wave particle, spirit matters, image and word, etc., etc. So Hermes, like said, is the god of Jungian psychology, because it's the relationship of the conscious to the unconscious. Hermes is the god of the dream world, the god of Winnicott, because they dealt in the same world of how things come into being, and to develop a personality. God of businessmen, because the god of exchanges, god of advertising. He's the god of complexity theory, because he's the god of the journey and not the goal. That's nonlinear phenomena and complexity theory. God of accidents and unpredictable changes of fate. Complexity theory, that's sensitive dependence on initial conditions. God of transitional and liminal states associated with emergence of archetypal positions. Hermes is the father, if you will, of the gods and goddesses. Those are archetypal positions, and he knows the dimensions of each of those. And that's associated with strange attractors in complexity theory. Messenger of the gods and the god of synchronicity. That's the interaction of powerful, complex forces. And then closing out then with my kind of just a working model of what I don't put a lot of energy into imagine what this could be like. My colleague in Chicago, Hoganson, had done some wonderful work with complexity and Jungian concepts. Talks about humans inhabiting a symbolic realm. So you increase the energy in a complex, for example, and that morphs into another dimension, into the archetypal dimension. And in that dimension, like complexity theory, things self-organize. In Jungian terms, we call that the self, the organizing function of the psyche. So if you think of something that is highly constellated, some issue that you really wrestle with, then the other element that one I use, and this is how I work with dreams. This is an article I wrote, Tips on Dream Interpretation. If you think of every element in a dream like a disco ball, and every element like a dog, for example, that could have many associations, personal and collective. But for the dream theme, the dream storyline, what are the particular associations of this disco ball that in conjunction with the particular associations on all the other disco balls in the dream come together for a storyline? So that would be like the a bracelet, and each of those beads in the disco ball would be the elements in the storyline. So getting back then to this image, that something powerfully constellated in the symbolic realm, let's say it's something around an eagle, well, that will, so it's not going to just create an eagle out of thin air. But if there's an eagle anywhere in the environment, and it could go this way or that way, well, if there's something like the sun around this powerfully constellated symbol, and that eagle would be like the earth, well, it will be within that field like iron filing drawn toward, to come toward, or show itself to the observer. And if you think of the moon, there is some other element. Also take it down to the level of quantum mechanics, that of the different quantum possibilities, that the possible presentation of within those quantum states that is relevant to that to the field of the symbol will show itself. This is just by, and one of the examples I have of that, and this is my last thought here, is I talked to a woman years ago who had gone to a ceremony, powerful ceremony in the Southwest. And she was concerned about getting safely back to Wisconsin. And the shaman, holy man, whatever, said, no, I will see that you're protected. And she noticed, not all the way back, but many times on her way back, that there were eagles appearing around her car on the way home. So these are just some of my speculation. Like I said, I don't put a lot. To me, the most important thing is that it's my experience, that it works, that it guides. That important guide is, I call it the ultimate self-help tool, and how I can use it in analysis. Oops, and oops, that was the image I was supposed to show. This is from cave art in Wisconsin, some shaman and probably a thunderbird. And there's my email address. I have a lot of articles on my Jungian psychology blog, including a lot on Jung and the environment, also guns and the American psyche. A very popular one now is David Brooks, Trump, Bob Dylan, and the I Ching, dreams and sense of place, and fairy tales. Thank you.
Thank you. It's really interesting. Yeah, I think it's ever since you did your thesis on the I Ching experiment in the 1980s, and I think no one has read it probably.
I tried to get it published after I got back from Zurich, couldn't find a publisher. And then you get involved in building up a practice, raising 3 kids and fixing up houses. I didn't do the experiment, so I have no statistics. I came up with these ideas, and I do have some connection with the head of the Chinese institute that studies the I Ching. And in my last trip to China post-conference tour, we went to Shandong University, and he presented, and I had a little chat with him. He's doing some experiments with the I Ching and cognitive behavioral therapy. And I just haven't had the time to get back to him with my ideas and see where we can go from there. It's most at this point, for me, it was just the thought that given the experience that it works, it's like, okay, what kind of experiment? When I thought that difficult as possible to do, it's not impossible, and you could put statistics, and it was that realization that really shook me up.
So let's move on to the Q&A. So who wants to speak first? From the or does it take a few moments? Yeah, maybe Roderick.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Dennis. That was really fascinating, and so much material, so many sort of areas, and I've written down the names of a whole clutch of books that I'm going to have to invent longer days to find the time to read. But so it was, so really enjoyable. I'm very excited to have somebody sort of on the call who or with us who both knows about a lot about synchronicity and knows a lot about insects. So I was wondering if I just give you a few associations and maybe if you could just sort of maybe speak to them. And one is this sort of area of this sort of liminal space that you talk about. One of the terms that's often used for it in the Jungian world is the imaginal, and of course the imaginal comes from the word imago, which is often used as a term for the fully grown insect. When an insect has its it gets its wings, when a butterfly gets its wings, and is sexually reproductive, then this is the imago. But of course that term also found its way into psychoanalysis, and obviously through the word imaginal. One of the people, I suppose, who was influential on that would be Frederick Myers, maybe, who wrote about the imaginal or the imago and the imaginal as a sort of stage in human development, a sort of a next stage in human development. So there's a lot of the sort of association between this process in insects and the the sort of psycho-spiritual development and evolution, indeed, the sort of realization of full potential and this sort of thing. And then going back to synchronicity, you get all these sort of synchronicities, or if you take Jung's essay on synchronicity, the sort of centerpiece of his essay, and the sort of almost iconic sort of image of synchronicity as such has become the scarab beetle, an insect. So that's one very important insect. In the same work, he also refers to bees prominently in the fourth chapter, and talks a lot about how bees can communicate without having a cerebrum and so on. And he also talks about ants. When he's talking about astrological experiment, he has recourse to the image of white ants coming out of matchboxes and things. Other people I know, I mean, when I do a talk in the series later, I'm going to talk partly about a poet who's very interested in the I Ching. Actually, wrote a long book. Richard Berengarten, who wrote a long book called "Changing" of poems about the I Ching. But he's also written another book called "The Blue Butterfly," based on a very powerful synchronistic experience he had that sort of generated a whole book-length poem, written over 20 years. So there's the butterfly. In my own experiences, I've had experiences with praying mantis, which has been very important to me. And then when I've looked into that, I find that there are loads of people who've had experiences with praying mantises and so on. So you can see where I'm going. What is there a connection? What sort of connection do you see, mythologically or entomologically, between synchronicity and insects?
Boy, what a wonderful setup question for me. One of my favorite articles that Hillman wrote is called Going Bugs. And I used a lot of that in my Land, Weather, Season, and Insects and my chapter on insects. And Hillman, I think, pointed out something very beautiful. He said, insects have figured out something basic about the cosmos. They are the most successful multicellular life forms. 2/3 of the species on the planet are insects. Mm-hmm. And they're so tuned into microenvironments and everything. They're extremely sensitive. And when you talked about imaginal, it's amazing that when a butterfly or insects would complete metamorphosis, like butterflies, go from the larval stage to the adult stage, what happens is their old fleshy forms totally break down into a soup. And then the adult form is built up from the imaginal buds that are floating around in that soup. Mm-hmm. That's the scientific term for it. Mm-hmm. And when I mentioned the like disco ball and all the associations, I always have to be careful when I'm working with somebody that has an insect in a dream, because as an entomologist, I may know all these things, but they, as a layperson, may have none of them. So that's where I have to be careful with projections. But I have been particularly interested in synchronicity in insects. And there were two, interesting enough, synchronistic experiences that happened with me around this very sacred site in Madison, Wisconsin. And a friend of mine, Gary Meyer, a psychiatrist from Canada who works at the State Mental Hospital, Mendota, one of the reasons he took the job there was because they have a lot of Indian mounds. So he would have dreams about what the arrangement of these mounds would be. And he wrote about that in a book he called The Eagle's Voice, about why this mound was pointed in that direction. Well, that's the northernmost setting for the moon in the 18.6-year moon cycle. But anyway, so in our Spirit in the Land conference, Gary was giving a talk. I was standing at the edge of the group, and Gary was just talking about how this one mound had been opened. A tree had grown into it, blown open, and it opened the mound so they could see what was inside. You can't excavate these things anymore. And as Gary was saying that, something caught my eye. The sunlight was hitting the exoskeleton of a 17-year locust. The locust spends 17 years in the ground, crawls up on the tree, splits its back open, and the adult form emerges. At the moment Gary was talking about. That's one thing. At the other end of the ground, he was showing a Jungian friend of mine, Louise Motti, a very unusual woman, these Indian mounds next to the Adolescent Treatment Center. And it's an eagle with a 624-foot wingspan. And we just got to the end of that wingspan. And I said, Gary, does Mendota, that's the big lake in Madison, I'd heard that means the lake where the Indian dies. And as I'm asking him, I noticed there's some insect just below Gary's left eye. And Gary says, well, it really means the lake where the Indian mates and dies. So any entomologist in the group would know that next to a lake, that's a mayfly, right? They live on a lake bottom. They emerge en masse, and one day they don't even have a digestive tract. They mate and they die. And there's an Indian mound on the other side of the lake called the two-tailed turtle. And I never saw a two-tailed turtle, but because of that synchronicity, I remember the first time I collected a mayfly. I had this big insect collection in high school. This is kind of like what the two-tailed turtle looks like. And the thing about a mayfly is it has these two long setae coming out of the base of its abdomen. So given that synchronicity, I suspect this is not a two-tailed turtle, but an insect. So because there are so many insects, so I think of it as an entomologist, I can be much more sensitive to synchronistic messages from the environment. But imagine an indigenous person just totally living on and off of the land, that how many messages they can get from nature. And being in a complex environment, it offers more chances for nature to mirror what's happening in you. So I'll stop at that. And I think your book, I think, was the one where you wrote about the mayfly. And after I gave my talk at Essex, where I met you, I went to visit he was my archetypal entomologist friend, retired back to his hometown east of Munich. And this was a story he told me, but he didn't tell other scientists it. He spent his whole life studying the mating behavior of crickets. He had this chamber set up completely isolated from the outside world. And they were studying the endogenous circadian rhythms of the crickets, noticing when they were active by when they would sing. And Werner noticed that this thing would sing when he came into the lab, even if it wasn't in the middle of its endogenous rhythm. So he wouldn't tell other entomologists about that, but he could tell a Jungian analyst. So as Jungian analysts, people say, well, these people are crazy anyway, I can tell them this crazy story. So we hear about these things that mainstream psychologists don't hear about. So thanks for, and so I told him about that story. I showed him the book.
Yeah, thank you very much. That's really
He
fascinating.
appreciated that.
Yeah, thank you both. So Angela, please. Yeah, Angela, you need to unmute yourself.
Thank you so much for your talk. I really enjoyed and got so many interesting points to follow up. My question is about the Platonic months. Some time ago, a student with Indonesian roots, she asked, the sequence of the Christian age of Pisces, the constellation of the second fish as evil, and the transition to the age of Aquarius, what does this mean for our non-Christian culture? So I said she had Indonesian roots. Yes, what would you answer?
Well, I think you'd have to refer back to Mr. Satko's presentation last time, it would relate to astrology and how he sees that that is probably some mirror of the Fibonacci about these. He was saying that these patterns in nature are kind of like mirrors of the long-term patterns of things that are happening on the earth from another culture. That to me is what is so interesting about Jungian psychology in different parts of the world, that these archetypal patterns, if we follow along the way Jung talked about it, like these are the basic patterns, ways of humans being in the world, and different cultures at different time periods will emphasize some archetypes or a combination of archetypes more than others. But to the extent that this Western system of astrology that we developed, you're talking particularly about the age of Pisces, mirrors some basic patterns as we see it from the West. It would be interesting to see if something with Indonesian cultures, or I think maybe like here in the North America, we think about the Mayan cultures and their predictions and their calendars. Are there some ways that these big archetypal, historical, cultural things overlap archetypally? That's one way I would approach it. The other is, the shadow side, just in terms of fundamental things like yin and yang and dark and light, that the way Jung talked about it for the Christian world is that the first 1,000 years of the 2,000-year cycles in these astrology, the Christian ego was built up. But then all the darker sides, when you get to the excess of that, is what we're experiencing now. And it's clear that something else, we can't keep going on the same way we are.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's where it gets very interesting. We have a lot of Mexicans training at Chicago Institute. So I think it'll be very interesting to see what's the influence of the Aztec culture on the Christianity they have down there, and how their archetypal constellations appear in their dreams. These cross-cultural comparisons, I think, are going to be really important and interesting.
Yeah. May I put another question shortly?
I think if the narrator or the moderator says, yeah, I'm open to it.
Yeah, von Franz is talking in time and number about specific situations caused by time. And for example, the I Ching 33, this is a fragmentation. And so this is not a situation of human error, but rather a constellation in the collective unconscious. And it is a phase of fragmentation. It is not the fault of the person. Usually we say, oh, the ego is on a bad track, and now the self puts the ego to the ground. But this is the other way around. And yes, I wonder whether this might be the state of the division of Osiris, or even the stage of Christ's crucifixion, that causes my suffering or our suffering, and it's not the fault of the ego. What do you think?
Oh yeah, Jung was totally seeped in Christianity, his heritage, and especially me being an environmentalist, I think of it as look at especially being a woman, look at the collective, the damage from the level of the collective unconscious, namely the Christian influence on Western culture, what that has done to the feminine. So we have an individual woman that is suffering from the Judeo-Christian myth, starting at the beginning, right? A woman is plagued with the pains of childbirth because she tempted Adam. All right, so as a mythic foundation at the collective unconscious for being a woman. You can see how the individual woman is going to be affected by what is we now call the patriarchy and all that sort of stuff. The good news is, in a way, that Jung saw, I was kind of able to articulate what I think are 5 main elements of the new age that he talked about for the paradigm shift. And one of them was going to be a rise of archetypal feminine energy. So in that way, does that kind of answer your question?
Not quite. It's. I wonder whether the fragmentation is in the realm of time and roomless, and that causes our suffering, or not the other way around. So there's the fragmentation comes from this nothingness in a way.
Yeah, I don't quite see it. I don't quite grasp it. So I'm sure I can answer it. The other thing I think of in terms of the fragmentation is coming from the consequence of the dark side of the Pisces and the overdevelopment of science and technology, and the effect that it's had at the physical level of our environment, and how that is fragmenting cultures, fragmenting political systems, and all that. And I don't quite can't quite grasp the fragmentation in time. The quality of the time, that's what von Franz talked about, and Jung talked about it in terms of how you can get a meaningful answer from these random processes. That everything that happens at that time reflects the quality of the time, but I don't know where the fragmentation. So maybe the hexagram, I think of it, 23.
Yes.
Splitting apart. Oh, I thought you said 33. Oh, yes. Yeah,
No,
sure. Well, that okay. Oh, I got it there. Yeah, that's the, right. That has the most negative line in the whole book, because it's following the metaphor as you go from the bottom line to the fourth of splitting. So it's a person in bed, and then the leg splits, the frame, and in line 4, the inhabitant of the bed splits. That would be like schizophrenia. Yeah, that is a archetypally I thought you said 30. I'm sorry, that's what threw me off.
Sorry.
Yeah. No. So one of my favorite hexagrams then that I mentioned in my talk is then the next one, which is 24, the turning point.
Yes.
Right. So that's when the sun begins. It's just the day after the longest night of the year, which is coming up for us in our solstice celebration, namely Christmas. Yeah. And right. There are just so many ways you can be sucked into that fragmentation. And that in the Lakota myth is related to the powers of the West, the thunderstorm. So if you're out there on your horse and your teepee in the thunderstorm on the Great Plains, it's really frightening, and it can break you. The positive side of that is it breaks up these dead old forms, but thunderstorms are accompanied by rain. Getting back to Roderick's statement, one of the images also for that is a cocoon. So it's the potential for new growth that comes after the destruction of the old. So you got to put the hexagrams always appear in pairs. So you have to always consider them and with their complements.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you for your question.
Okay, thank you both. Chi is the next.
Hi. Hi, Dennis. Thank you very much for your beautiful presentation. When I'm not quite sure. I'm asking question, but I want to share some reasons I witnessed something, because I was very surprised when I saw the book you share about the dog, because recently I just lost my a golden retriever 3 months ago. He died on the first day of the Ghost Gate, the Chinese Ghost Gate open. Yeah, the day he died.
Mhm.
And then I also, quite agree with Roderick said the incest might play a very significant meaning in terms of psychic communications between me and my animals. At the start, I was very devastated because I was trying many nights to hope to meet my dog in my dream, but I haven't he haven't appear until one day, because every day I burned the candle for my dog in front of their ashes. And then one day I saw a very big insect just on top the ashes. There was a very big spider. And then after I don't know why the insect just very attracted me to talk to him. Just suddenly I said, are you Gamjai? Are you Gamjai? And then suddenly, just immediately, the robot vacuum behind me, it automatically opened. Just we don't know why. It just automatically opened. And
The
then
vacuum, the
the
vacuum you
vacuum,
said?
yeah, the vacuum. Because when he was alive, I always joke with him at about, hey, Gamjai, tell the vacuum to help us to clean the floor.
No.
He is very engaging with this communication and activities, and they're very close. And then after yeah. So these coincidence, these synchronicity things bring me back to the hope to communicate with my dog again. And then, surprisingly, recently, the vacuum just out of order. He will. The vacuum will always automatically walk around the home by no reasons. We haven't said anything, even though my husband just very wonder, oh, why? And then we at the table, and the whole family sometimes we talk, oh, it's open,
Mm,
walk around.
uh,
I just want to share this.
Thank you for sharing that. One of the when I read that Sheldrake experiment, I thought, duh. I mean, dogs especially, they're like compulsive lovers, right? Because they're pack animals, the connection with other animals, and they just replace us. Where, a pack dog, and we've all heard stories throughout our lives about those deep connections. So it's like, oh, that's much simpler to do a synchronicity experiment with a dog than about human beings and about somebody's affair. So yeah, and a thing I forgot to mention, one thing that was just so amazing, it finally dawned on me, was a wonderful paper that Henderson wrote about the I Ching years ago. And it's the importance of divination in Chinese culture, right? So this book, the I Ching, has been the most read book outside of the Bible. And so for most of Chinese history, going back to Chinese shamanism, they've had divination. So for the Chinese, up until like Mao and when they began to suppress it, it's like if you want some guidance in your life, rather than trying to divine the word of God, what God wills for me, the Chinese said, let's just toss some coins and see what the sages say. It's just this amazing difference. And it really intrigues me about the effect that this has had on a cultural system like that, and why it's maybe so different from their populous neighbor India, where they have all these gods and goddesses with all these arms and so on. But for China to be able to tap into a wisdom, archetypal wisdom, ultimately based on the archetype of number, I just find it intriguing things to think about. But thank you for sharing dog stories. I'm a dog lover myself.
Thank you so
And
much. Thank you
you
so much.
always hear stories about people and the connections to dogs. They're so phenomenal. Thanks for sharing that.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you both. And I'm sorry we have run out of time, and so sorry, Justin, we won't be able to have the time for your question. And thank you, Dennis, again for the wonderful session with us. And we will have a break and return again next year. So thank you everyone for joining, and we hope you have
Oh, thank you.
some good rest. Okay, we'll see you guys next year.
Bye-bye.
Goodbye. Thank you.